Okay, welcome back everybody. And we're on to agenda item 12, planning application 240371 FUL Bridgend, Hertford. And that's pages 250 to 266 on your agenda pack. And we're over to Senior Planning Officer Jamie Quinton to present the report.
Thank you, Chair. Good afternoon, everyone. The last item before you all is a planning application for the removal of a residential caravan and the conversion of an existing building to a dwelling. The application is before you all today as the officer recommendation differs from the position of a local ward member. There's only one update in light of the changes to the NPPF made on the 12th of December. The reason for refusal should need to be updated to refer to paragraph 178, which refers to application of the exceptions test, which we'll obviously cover later in the presentation. So you were just considering an application to the north of the village. The application site in this case is located to the east of the village along the A3052, which runs between Newton Popperford and Sidmouth. On the aerial image you've got on your screens, we've got the application site enclosed in the red line, which consists of a fibre cement barn, which is here. We've got a touring unit just to the side, 2 storage containers just within the northern boundary, and the boundaries are characterised by dense vegetation and mature trees. The pink shaded areas are 3 Grade 2 listed heritage assets. You've got Newton Poppleford Bridge here, Leap Bridge here, and then Riverside Cottage to the north of the A3052. So members might just want to note that the black line is the built-up area boundary for Newton Poppleford, just to give you an idea of the proximity of the site to the village. And as mentioned in the previous presentation, the village and the application site in this instance is within the East Devon National Landscape. So, due to the site's proximity to the River Otter, which runs along here, immediately to the west of the site, the land is within flood zones 2, 3, but most importantly, flood zone 3B, which is functional floodplain, which means the land is at an increased risk of flooding. I think it's over 3.3% probability of annual flooding. So the application site is located outside the built-up area boundary for Newton Popperford, and therefore the provisions of Strategy 7 apply, which Strategy 7 of the local plan, which only permits development when proposals are in accordance with a local or neighbourhood plan policy that explicitly permits development. As detailed within the committee report, it is the position of officers that the structural survey has failed to demonstrate that the existing building is capable of conversion. This is due to a lack of any investigative work to the foundations or concrete slab of the building and the absence of a corrosive survey. The proposals therefore fail to meet criteria of Policy D8, which we refer to in obviously the other application, which requires that existing buildings are structurally sound and capable of conversion. The other policy that we've considered is Policy H6, which is titled Replacement of Existing Dwellings in the Countryside, which allows the replacement of existing buildings. However, that policy requires that there is an existing permanent habitable dwelling located on the site. So discussions between officers and the applicant have revolved around whether or not this policy would be applicable, because there's an existing touring caravan on the site which has accrued lawfulness, and that's been established through granting of a certificate, which we'll move on to in a second. However, it's been established through case law that a caravan is not a dwelling house, and therefore we are of the position that that policy does not apply in this case. So on your screen now is the location plan that was approved and appended to the certificate of lawfulness, which outlines the land which has been granted lawfulness to site a mobile caravan to be occupied for residential purposes. The siting of the touring unit, I believe, followed the burning down of a static caravan back in 2020. And it's the position, there's no evidence that any sort of residential use has been implemented again. So the site hasn't been used for residential purposes since 2020. Notwithstanding that, the CPE is still a material consideration in assessing the current proposals. So I'm just going to run through some site visit photos. This photo is taken from the site's access, looking in a southwesterly direction towards the application building, which is this corrugated fibre cement building with the curved roof. It's got 2 bays which are open on the front. And that one's just a close-up picture. This is taken looking at the building's southeastern elevation. And this photo is taken looking towards the site's access with the A3052. We have received some third-party concerns with regards to the use of this access in terms of the impact on highway safety. These concerns are acknowledged. However, as mentioned, we've got a lawful residential use of part of the site, and in the absence of any objection from the County Highway Authority, we're in a position we cannot oppose the proposals on highway safety grounds. So there's a picture of the touring caravan which is currently on site. This picture is looking along the northern boundary, and you've got 2 shipping containers there. And that's one last photo of the southeastern elevation. So on your screen now are the proposed drawings. So all of the external sheeting would be replaced with timber cladding for the walls, and there would be a corrugated steel roof and a central flue. There are Juliet balconies on that southeast elevation, and it's anticipated that the windows would be constructed in aluminium frames, but if members are of the position that the application to be approved, we would also secure that detail through condition. The application is also supported by a protected species report, which found that development wouldn't cause any harm to protected species, but has recommended that the proposals include bird, bat, and bee boxes, which are shown on the drawings here, here, and here. So this is the ground floor plan. So because of the flood risk posed to the site and development, the design of the proposals have ensured that all habitable living floor space is at first floor level, retaining the ground floor to be used as a carport and storage and workshop. So this is the first floor plan. We've got 2 bedrooms, living, dining, and kitchen space. So the submitted site plan shows that the existing storage containers would be removed alongside 2 smaller outbuildings and the mobile home. And the purpose of that is the removal of the caravan essentially is the applicant justifying that there's no net increase in dwellings here, and therefore wouldn't amount to any environmental harm, but also in part to tidy up the site. And the removal of the shipping containers and those outbuildings, the mobile home, alongside the design of the building, is considered to result in some enhancement to the site's setting, which does weigh in favour of the scheme. However, the main issue for members to consider is whether or not that benefit outweighs the concerns with regards to flood risk. So policy EN21 of the local plan, the MPPF and the PPG are clear that residential proposals at risk of flooding shall be subject to the sequential test that aims to steer proposals to areas at the lowest risk of flooding. The PPG highlights some forms of development which are exempt. However, replacement structures, replacement dwellings aren't included. Discussions between ourselves, the applicants, and the EA have been extensive about this issue. And during discussions, the applicant has provided an appeal decision, which is referred to in the committee report, where the inspector was considering a very similar proposal where a mobile home was being proposed to be replaced with a permanent dwelling. And in that case, the lawful existing residential use of the site was considered material, and therefore, despite considering the sequential test, dismisses it as a reason for refusing the application. However, as per paragraph 178 of the MPPF, the proposal still need to be assessed against the exceptions test. And I've included on this slide, firstly, to show kind of thought process. Firstly, we applied the sequential test, or in this case, not to do that, but then we need to move on to the exceptions test. And when that's passed, it's then a question of whether or not the development would be safe for its lifetime. In terms of when we should and shouldn't apply the exceptions test is dependent firstly on the risk, the level of risk of flooding post the site, but also the vulnerability classification of the use being considered. In this case, as mentioned at the start of the presentation, we are dealing with land that is within functional floodplain and dealing with a residential use, which is more vulnerable. And therefore, you can see from this table that development should not be permitted, full stop. The distinction between this application and the appeal decision that I referred to is that that land concerned flood zone within land within flood zone 3A, where the exception test was required, applied, and removing, which allows then the wider public sustainability benefits of the scheme to be considered, which weighed in favour of approval. In this case, it's clear that in functional floodplain, a more vulnerable use is completely unacceptable and development should not be permitted. This position is reflected and supported by the comments made from the Environment Agency. So, point number 3 still needs to be considered, whether or not development would be safe for its lifetime. And I'm just going to bring up one of the first slides again. Because of the site's position in functional floodplain, the potential depths of flooding water and floodwater around the building during a design flood could potentially reach heights of up to 1.5 meters. Now, whilst the design of the building has been done in such a way that prospective occupants could seek refuge at first floor level, during such an event, they would then have to depend on containment and wait for emergency services to extract them from the building. That is in accordance with the Environment Agency's ADEPT guidance, is considered unacceptable and isn't a satisfactory way in which to deal with contingency measures during a flooding event. The applicant's FRA states that they would provide a flood warning and evacuation plan as part of a conditioned discharge. However, we're of the position that even if that was the case, they could not provide us with a satisfactory plan. In order for prospective occupants to get to publicly accessible land that isn't at risk of flooding, they would have to exit the building through land which is at risk of flooding. And therefore, that is unlikely to happen, and they would depend on containment. So it's a position of officers that the issues surrounding flood risk significantly and demonstrably outweigh the limited benefits to the setting of the site, and therefore is recommended for refusal. And I appreciate now we are in a position where we're applying the tilted balance. However, the footnote of paragraph 11D of the NPPF says that that isn't applicable for proposals where flooding is an issue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Jamie. Okay, so we've got a statement from the agent, Iestyn John, which I will read out. Good afternoon, members. Unfortunately, we are unable to attend the meeting today to speak on behalf of our client, Kevin Howe, but we're grateful for the opportunity to emphasise that this is a wholly sensible application where the only purpose of it is to seek a betterment of the site. In our view, it must surely be seen as a positive to the environment, the wider community and the safety of the applicants, which is why it has also been supported locally by the ward member and the parish council. It is acknowledged in the officer report that the proposal would rejuvenate the site, but the reasons for objection stem from the use being more vulnerable in flood risk terms. However, there is an existing habitable lawful mobile home on the site which this proposal would replace, and there would be no net increase in the number of residential properties. Furthermore, the proposal will only contain 2 bedrooms. In simple terms, the applicant is seeking to convert an existing building which has been evidenced is suitable for conversion. They would remove the mobile home and rather than live at ground floor level with the constant threat of being washed away, they would instead reside at first floor level and be safely above the floodwaters. It is therefore difficult to imagine how and why this is not being viewed as a positive application which reuses an existing building and as a proposal that only seeks to provide benefits not just to the site but also the wider area. In response to the reason for refusal, there are clear tangible benefits which these proposals would bring, which include the flood risk assessment, which details that the proposal would be safe for its lifetime and would facilitate a reduction in the drainage catchment. The proposal offers wider significant visual benefits through a sensitive conversion of a building within the national landscape, which will enhance the appearance of the site and therefore the surrounding area. The site will be decontaminated. The occupants will be required to sign up to a flood warning plan, which will present benefits of the occupiers being made aware of any flooding event and thus reducing pressure on wider services if required. They don't have to do this currently. Finally, but importantly, given that the mobile home is at ground level, there is no option of egress other than into floodwater, and the occupant risk having the caravan or themselves being affected. In terms of the burden on emergency services, if the occupants were to remain at first floor level in a flood event as part of this proposal, and either wait out the flood or be rescued, this would be a better option than having to look for the occupants downstream if the mobile home were to be washed away. Right? Disaster scenarios here, aren't there? If the application were refused, there could therefore be serious human implications in a flood event. Questions would have to be asked why this opportunity to give residents of the mobile home the option of being able to be provided with safety was not taken. We would therefore urge the committee to see this proposal as a sustainable proposal which will not only significantly enhance the appearance of the site and national landscape, but also ensure that the occupants can live safely above any flooding event. Okay, so that is a statement from the agent, Iestyn John. And we also hear from the ward member, Councillor Chris Burrup.
Me again, Chair. Well, we have a first, members of the committee. It's the first time that I would be in agreement with Mr. Iestyn John and Belle Cornwall in almost any respect of anything that's previously gone before. But in this case, I do agree. We are faced with an imperfect scenario, and having spent the previous application, or the time of the previous application, to try and argue the case for maintaining policy. In this case, we have due reason for exception, in my opinion. The photos that you saw were of a pretty rundown barn, Dutch-style barn. What you didn't see, actually, sadly, from those photos, is the view that you can see that barn from the A3052. It is the main entrance from the Sidmouth direction to the village of Newton Popperford. And frankly, it looks like a right state. So the main reason for undertaking or supporting this application is to try and get this cleared up. It has been like it for 20 plus years. Frankly, the residents deserve better. If we don't permit this, then how are we going to get the entranceway to Newton Popperford tidied up and the eyesore removed? So the application we have is for the removal of residential caravan and conversion of the existing barn to a dwelling. It is inside the national landscape where it is said that conservation and enhancement of the natural environment is a primary consideration. So there is, as officers have just stated, some enhancement recognised within the scheme. The existing building is a conversion from barn to residential, already permitted residential caravan on site, which would be removed, which was permitted under Certificate of Lawfulness 21/0264/CPE. It is recognised that it's in flood zone 3, but the building is designed to deal with the maximum expected flood level, as all will be living on the first floor. I'd also point out that this isn't a development for profit. The applicant has said to me that he wishes to live here. So he's not going to design something that's fundamentally dangerous for him and his family to live in. He is resident in the village. He's a local developer. He's done a few local developments, but he intends to live in this development as his last development, as I'm told. The NPPFF on para 124 says we should make as much use as possible of previously damaged or brownfield land. I mean, this is, if nothing else, it's brownfield land. And 125C, we should give substantial weight to the use of brownfield land and remediate and despoiled and derelict land. And that is, again, written within the NPPF. And the irony, as has just been read out, is if this application is refused, we're left with a residential caravan which has perfectly lawful permission to be on that floodplain, previously granted by this committee, presumably, or by officers, to allow residency on that floodplain to exist. So we've got a more dangerous situation than if this application is permitted. So I appreciate it is a great dilemma. Policy EN 21 was quoted of the local plan. It excludes minor development which does not increase the size of the building or household of development unless it would create a separate dwelling. Now, arguably, we do have the conversion of the existing building into a dwelling, but it doesn't add additional footfall or residency to the site. Para 178 is the exception test that was mentioned earlier. The development would provide wider the tests are, would the development provide wider sustainability benefits to the community that outweigh the flood risk? I would argue definitely yes. And B, is the development safe for its lifetime? We have a statement from the applicant's agents to say it is designed to be safe for its lifetime. So it is a dilemma, but in summary, this is an opportunity to greatly tidy up the shabby entranceway to Newton Popperford, whilst enhancing the national landscape once and for all. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Burrup. Just before we go to questions, I've got a few for Jamie, if I may. Mr. John has said the existing building has been evidenced it's suitable for conversion, but I thought I heard you say in your report that we hadn't had any evidence.
Yeah, no, we have a structural survey which has been submitted as part of the
right.
proposals to support the assertion that the building is capable of conversion. However, the survey comes with a number of recommendations. One of those is that an inspection into the foundations is needed, an inspection into the concrete slab is needed, and also a corrosive survey is needed. So in our opinion, the application hasn't demonstrated that the existing structural elements of the building could be retained and converted without effectively being tantamount to a rebuild. Yeah. So, and this approach to this issue is established in the Hibbett case law, which members may have heard of, and it is a matter of planning judgment. But this was quite, in our opinion, that was quite an easy position to come to. The structural survey simply doesn't go far enough to demonstrate the existing building can be converted.
Okay, thank you. My next question was, because I think Mr. John has definitely stated almost a kind of blackmail that if we don't permit this, we are putting these poor people at risk. But there's no suggestion that the caravan is actually being used. I mean, Councillor Burroup's absolutely correct. They could live there, but have we any evidence that the caravan is actually being used?
So, no, we haven't got any evidence that the caravan's being currently used. I've been involved in pre-app discussions and also dealing with this application where I've made a number of site visits, and at no point has it looked like the caravan is being occupied. I think from the site photo, you can see that it's fairly overgrown. The touring unit itself isn't in great condition. I wouldn't go as far as to say that the lawful use has been abandoned. I think we'd be on sticky ground there. But we're not convinced that it's currently being occupied at the moment. And from the evidence that was submitted in support of the certificate, it looks like it's probably been vacant since 2020. Yeah.
When the previously consented building burned down, apparently.
Yes, and then the touring unit was bought on site. Yeah.
Okay, and Mr. John also references a flood risk assessment that details the proposal would be safe for its lifetime and would facilitate a reduction in the drainage catchment. I'm not sure what he means by that.
I think what Mr. John is referring to there is that they're looking to remove. You saw on the site plan there's a number of buildings that are looking to be removed, including like a scrap heap and some of the storage containers. I think that's where Yeston John's getting at, is that removing those elements improves the drainage catchment or the ability of the site to infiltrate water. But I'd caveat that I don't want to speak on his behalf, but I think that's what he's getting at. Did you want me to comment on the development being safe for its lifetime as well? Was that?
Yes.
Well, I think just referring back to the points made about ensuring that there's safe access and egress from the building during a flood event. So we disagree with that point, that we are not convinced that an acceptable flood warning and evacuation plan could be put forward to us that is acceptable, not from our point of view as planning officers, but also in the eyes of the Environment Agency too.
Okay. Questions? Councillor Faithful.
Thank you, Chair. Well, first thing, I'd like just clarification. There's some corrugated black and orange tends to mean corrugated steel rather than fibre cement. So it looks pretty much like a corrugated steel all round. Reference conversion of barns. Ottery Town Council, some years ago, we did our training on the subject, and we were shown a Dutch barn with just the roof and no sides, and that was suggested to be not a conversion because basically there was practically nothing there. This has got sides, but they're acknowledging they're going to take all the sides off and they're going to take all the roof off. So basically, they're virtually a complete build from virtually nothing apart from a basic steel frame. So does that constitute a proper barn conversion? Because from what the training we were given, it doesn't sound like it is. Thank you, Chair.
I'm sorry if I wasn't clear right at the start. So when we were considering whether or not policy D8 was applicable, because of the shortfall of what we consider shortfalls of the structural survey, where we agree, we feel that the works required to convert or provide a dwelling on site would go beyond conversion and would be tantamount to a rebuild. So I'd agree with your position on the application in that regard.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ian Barlow.
Thank you, Chair. Well, you've answered the question, is the barn suitable for conversion, so I won't go there. Sewage treatment plant, that you're putting in a sewage treatment package. My understanding is they get dug in the ground quite deep. And obviously you're right by the river there. Now they can be put in them. If it floods and then the sewage treatment plant goes underwater, that can't be good, I can't imagine, for the sewage treatment plant or for the contamination of the river. I just wonder if you've got any comments on that. The mobile home that you've got permission for, I presume that's just a single bed mobile home, is it? Does it come with any size mobile home you could put in there, or is it a specific size? Because at the moment it's a touring van, which is tiny. We're obviously, should we pass this, going to be increasing the size of the thing, 2 bedrooms, as you say. The other one is the land that you're showing there is just the blue outline, but I believe it's owned in a larger parcel of land around the edge of it, which does go up to a higher area on the right-hand side by the little road that cuts through to Otterton. And I just wonder, it shows some buildings there. Are there buildings or houses there already? I didn't get to go and actually visit the site. And I just wondered if we are just on about removing the caravan, you know, and clearing the site up, could a deal not be done to move it there, which would definitely be safer? And should we be willing to pass this, can we insist on a Devon restriction on the building if we do insist on this, so that it is a permanent residence dwelling and only with I think it's section 147, the Devon restriction on it? Thank you.
Jim, I'll take a couple more questions and then let you deal with them all together, because I've got a couple more. Jenny Brown.
Okay, just a couple. The Environment Agency in 2023 said they were no longer providing bespoke advice on consultations for change of use, yet you actually got them down as a consultee. So are they still providing consultations? And is the housing, part of the housing estate, actually in the flood zone as well? Or the housing estate there?
Good question. Okay, we'll get Jamie to come back on that one, or perhaps Councillor Burrup will be able to answer that one. Councillor Bailey.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, has the applicant made any reference to increasing the ground level by, say, a metre and a half, which would alleviate the problem of flooding, because it would be above what is considered to be the high water mark? I just wonder if that was a consideration, which would be relatively easy to do.
I suppose it depends on the height of the building, but their proposal is to put simply functional stuff on the ground floor, parking and a workshop, and put all living accommodation on the first floor. So I suppose they feel that's better than simply raising the base, which within the footprint of the actual building wouldn't be sufficient unless you raise the height of it. But I'll let Jamie answer that one as well. We got any more questions for Jamie, another one, Jenny. Yep.
Right, okay, so the EN21, the local plan says that a sequential approach will be taken to considering developments, but excludes minor developments and changes of use. Therefore, as the proposal was a change of use, is it considered that the development need not be the subject of sequential testing?
I don't think this has come forward as a change of use. It's a full planning application, and it's a conversion. It's a barn conversion. I'll let the planning officers come back on that one, but the application is not for change of use. It's a full planning application. And barn conversions are not normally considered changes of use because if I understand it correctly, there's already a kind of residential permission on that land, or at least on the caravan being sited on that land. But I'll let the officers come back on that one, Jenny.
Is it not a conversion of existing building from a barn into a dwelling?
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. So
So, Councillor Barlow, in response to your question, so yeah, so the package treatment plant, whether or not it would just, the implications of that, if it were to be flooded, so they would have to apply to the Environment Agency for a permit for the package treatment plant. So that's something that would be considered post decision.
But it is likely to be a problem, I would say.
You said it would be.
I'm sorry, I'm just interrupting there. I think siting a package treatment plant within functional floodplain is likely I mean, as I say, we're not the permitting authority, but I can see technical problems with that in the fact of it becoming inundated. So yes, I think there could be issues with that.
Presumably it would have to discharge somewhere, which would be into the rivers,
Yeah.
unless there's a valve somewhere to stop it backing up, which there might well be.
Yeah, so they're actually proposing the package treatment plant immediately to the southeast of the barn, the dwelling, and that would go into a drainage field. But because of the extent of the flood zone, I take the point. But also bearing in mind that the Environment Agency have had a chance to comment on that because that detail is part of the application and haven't raised any concerns at the moment, and that we know that they will have to apply for a permit at some point. I don't think at this stage we could raise it as an issue or grounds for refusal.
Are we sorry to interrupt you, but are we giving ourselves a problem if you pass something that then they can't get the license for? You've already passed it. We've had it before where we're going to put ourselves in a position where they have a permission for a building but not permission for the drains. Is that not a...
Well, that's not our problem, is it?
Yeah, I mean...
we just have to look at the application and decide whether we consider it's acceptable or not. If the applicants subsequently find they can't get permission for the package treatment plant, they'll either have to find another solution or abandon it, permission notwithstanding. There were some other questions there, Jamie, if you'd like to deal with those.
So the size of the caravan, so any temporary structure would have to meet the definition of a caravan. So they could put on a static, which could potentially be slightly larger than the small touring unit we've currently got on site. In terms of if it could be moved, at the moment, no, that would need planning consent. That would need a separate planning permission to be granted. At the moment, the certificate of lawfulness only relates to the area of land enclosed in red on your screen there. That is the plan that is appended to the certificate. That is the only part of the site which currently has lawfulness to be used for residential, for the siting of a caravan for residential purposes. And in terms of the restriction, the Devon restriction that you referred to, that isn't something we would apply in this circumstance. and hasn't been put forward as an affordable unit of housing on this application.
So, yes, just sort of, so in terms of the Environment Agency, are they still providing comments? So I think it's clear that this isn't just a change of use, it is the material, it's the engineering of building operations necessary to convert the dwelling as well as change of use. So there's two aspects of this. And the Environment Agency have commented. They've obviously, you know, functional floodplain, as they've said, ordinarily they would just have an outright objection in principle to any form of housing in functional floodplain. The officer did raise with them that we were having to consider the implications of the fact that there is this certificate of lawfulness for the caravan. And I suppose for clarity, I'm sure you're all aware, a certificate of lawfulness is not that we have decided that we think it's acceptable to have a caravan there. They have demonstrated to us that a caravan has been there for a period of 10 years or more, and therefore we have to issue a certificate of lawfulness, whether or not we think it's a sensible place to have a residential use. In terms of the comments about raising the ground levels, so as Mr. Quinton already mentioned, and as the chair did, the actual building itself is designed so that all the residential accommodation is above the floodwater level. But the key issue is that there has to be safe access and egress at times of flood. So that if the emergency services needed to access that, well, to prevent the need for emergency services to have to try and evacuate people from a building, for example, if somebody was having needed medical help, etc., you're then putting medical emergency services at risk to life, because they're then having to take vehicles through potentially 1.5 meters of very fast moving flood water. And there is only there's limitations on where emergency services can safely go within flood water. So that is not just the matter of can they just stay dry and sit upstairs. It's the fact that we have to consider that then what happens if they need to get in, anybody needs to get in and out of that property because there's another emergency occurring. And raising the ground levels, where you see the extent of the site, to raise the ground levels so that it wouldn't be possible, even if they raised the ground level of the entire site, to get beyond the flood water. And also raising the ground levels outside of the footprint of the building would then increase the risk of flooding elsewhere, because you're pushing flood waters outside of the site. So that wouldn't be a solution. And then, Councillor Brown, you talked about EN21, the sequential test, so not being needed. So Mr. Quinton's already explained that we're not applying the sequential test in this instance. So what we've gone on to is, does it then meet the exception test? And the table that Mr. Quinton had up on the board there was showing how you apply the sequential test. And you can see there, a residential use is in the more vulnerable category, and then exception test required. And you can see that it says there's an X, and it means, and then that says development should not be permitted. So when you are proposing residential in flood zone 3B, it should not be permitted. So the only material consideration that we as officers have gone through is there is the lawful use for a caravan on the site. However, the caravan isn't occupied, doesn't appear to have been occupied for the last 4 years. And what we're considering is the introduction of a larger house, which will almost certainly be occupied. It's offering family-sized accommodation. So we are introducing, a much more substantial building, which will be occupied, versus a small caravan, which is currently unoccupied. And yes, it could be. Somebody could live in that caravan, but as I said, there's nobody there at the moment currently at risk. Whereas we know for certain that this dwelling would be occupied if it was permitted.
Okay, any more questions? Yep. Councillor Faithful?
Thank you, Chair. Just to clarify, this site was an engineering workshop, isn't it? I believe it was where a gentleman used to keep his steamroller and do various steel, metal work and things. So what we're saying about access is basically they need to put 1,000 tons of hardcore down to go from the road to the house to raise the whole ground up so it's drivable above the flood line.
So in terms of the lawful use for the site, it appears that evidence available to us indicates that it's been used as a scrapyard, but we've got, or formally used as a scrapyard, but we haven't got any sort of certificate to clarify that. And I don't think there's any sort of substantial evidence as part of the application to shed any light on what the lawful use of the site is. In terms of raising the level in order to provide access that is outside the flood zone, there's also some concerns over that, because as Wendy just alluded to, when you start to alter ground levels within the functional floodplain, you then potentially are disrupting flood flows. It's land that is needed and designed to flood during a flooding event, and therefore we do not consider that option of raising levels as an appropriate solution. And if it did come forward, it would have to be done so through the application, and we would have to consult with the EA. But without speaking on their behalf, I think there would probably be concerns over that.
Okay, Councillor Jenny Brown?
Sorry, so you're not actually increasing the size of the building, are you? So you've still got the same rainfall coming off. You're not increasing rainfall from a roof or anything like, you're not increasing the surface water, the runoff from the roof, are you? No, thank you.
No, I think the answer to that's no. The building is no bigger. I mean, it is proposed to be a conversion, but it's the flooding is going to come from the river, not obviously from the roof of the building. Councillor Barlow.
No, thank you, Chair. I was just going to ask the question, is it agriculture or is it employment land? Yeah, what was the classification? But you've answered that, so I don't need it.
Yeah, sounds like there's no particular designation for this land at the moment. Okay, if there's no more questions, then we can go into debate. Councillor Barlow, you were first.
Thank you, Chair. Well, again, I've listened to everything that's going on. I am very happy to argue, debate with officers when I think something is wrong or something, what they are suggesting, common sense would say that by bending the rules slightly or using the rules, the balance, as we're always talking about, gives a benefit that outweighs the damage or the danger that is possible. I know this site very well. I know that barn. I used to know the person that lived there 40-something years ago. And it's always been a flood zone. And it's not like, reminds me of one that we were dealing with here in Seaton, that I went against officers at that time with the flood risks that were there. But it was going to make a big difference to the area. And again, the flood risks were not like this. It wasn't 3B for a start. You know, when this flood's there, the power of that water going past is quite scary. You know, I've been there before, looked down and thought, you just wouldn't want to accidentally fall in it or anything like that. So it was really scary. I'm concerned about the sewage issue. First of all, because for a sewage treatment plant to work, you need to have drainage for a start, the drainage field that you talk about, for it to soak away. You know, you're so close to the river level there, it's going to be very difficult to get that to work then, let alone if it then floods over that and, you know, contaminates it that way. So, and I know that isn't a planning issue, that will come later, but again, you know, I think that's something we should take into. I sympathise with the idea of trying to clean that area, but I'm sure there must be other ways we can work with the residents to clean that area up. and I know it's difficult because we're not quite sure exactly what it is there, but and the other thing is, you know, at the moment, you've got a van, it's not in use, it could be in use. But if it's a building, a house, you are definitely going to have people live there. Gentleman's already said he wants this as a lifetime property. So, you know, he will be older at some stage. I don't know what he is now, but if it's a lifetime, he wants it to be his lifetime house. Then at the end of the day, when you're older, you need more care. You may need rescuing more. It could be for families or anything. So, look, I cannot support this. I'm very happy to when I think there is a real gain to be had. I don't see there is a gain here. I think the downsides are much higher than the possible benefits. So I will happily, when you're ready, make a proposal if you're not ready for it now, but otherwise I will support the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Brown, you going to second?
No,
Oh, okay.
no.
Well, I will just seek a seconder for that one. Thank you, Councillor Smith. So we will continue debate. So Councillor Bailey, then we'll come to you, Jenny.
Thank you, Chair. Like Mr. Barlow, I too knew the owner. I knew him very well. He's passed on some many years ago now. But I used to operate vehicles, commercial vehicles out of that yard for him. And as to getting in and out, I never found it a problem. And I'm talking about driving a 40-ton truck, which, as you know, is a considerable sized vehicle. The flooding, I worked for him for many, many years. The flooding, it's not as bad practically as it's being painted here. It used to come up a couple of feet every now and then, but it didn't stay for long, day or two, and then it drained away. So I think there's too much importance being put on the flooding. I think that with the Lower Otter scheme, which just come in now, it makes the floodplain of the River Otter considerably larger than it ever was before. So questions in my mind are, with that scheme done, to improve the flood zone by well over 100% than what was there before, that this is not going to flood again in the future. Because actually now there is somewhere for that flood water to go, where in previous years there wasn't anywhere for it to go. So that's a relevant point, I think. And regarding it being described as a scrapyard, it may look like one, but dear old George wouldn't throw anything away. And that's where most of this came from. He's a brilliant engineer, a well-respected man in the area. As I say, he's sadly gone on now, but that's where the scrapyard appearance comes from. I mean, there was an old crane there for years. I think that's gone now, but he always saw the scrap as money in his pocket, you know. So that's why it's there. But I think from what I've just said about the floodplain, I would find myself in favour of it. It's going to enhance the area considerably. It really would make a considerable difference. So I'd like to say my support. Thank you.
Okay. Well, I'll just point out we've got no evidence, and the Environment Agency haven't suggested that the improvements to the floodplain further down would change the flooding there. And the flood. Yeah, well, yeah, but I don't think it was to alleviate flooding in Newton Poppleford particularly, but certainly further down, yes. But I think we'd be on very dangerous ground permitting a development in a flood zone at such high risk. And in your day, maybe it was a couple of feet, but we know that intensive rainfall events are getting more frequent. There's no guarantee that wouldn't increase the height. Jenny Brown.
Right, okay, this site sort of mirrors one, which was 23/1147/FUL, which came to committee 24th of October 23 in Wimpole, conversion of an existing building from barn into dwelling. It was in a flood zone. It had the river running through the site, and it was a main river. And the planning officers put that one up for approval because we didn't have a 5-year housing land supply. And obviously you had to have the presumption in favour of sustainable development. And because it was a single dwelling, they didn't have to do the sequential listing. But you just need to put a condition on. So you've got the scheme that enables safe pedestrian access and egress via Pendle, which I think Liston John did put a scheme in. And I don't think that we should be refusing this, especially when the officers were in favour of something almost like a mirror image. I don't agree at all.
I think it's always a bit dangerous citing precedent of other planning applications unless they're absolutely in the same area. In this case, it's in a national landscape, so different tests apply. That possibly also strengthens the tidying up argument. Although I must say, I've driven down that hill many a time and I'm too busy concentrating on the road to have looked into that yard. And I can't say I'd ever really noticed it. I think maybe out the corner of my eye I'd seen the barn, but yeah, obviously I don't live around there, and I'm sure I'd be much more conscious of it if I did. Do we have any further speakers before we go to a vote? Well,
Sorry, it was in the green wedge as well, the other one.
oh, okay. Yeah, Councillor Barlow.
Just very quickly on the point of the otter regeneration down the bottom where they opened it up, and that's 4 miles away from this. And again, much as I understand what Brian's getting at of easing it up, you know, I don't think that's going to back up that far to do that sort of thing. So much as it's a great improvement at that end of it, this is a pinch point. It's in a valley, and again, you know, previously where we have given permission to put houses in the floodplain, which is the housing estate that we mentioned before, there are big banks there that squeeze it down, that make it worse there. So again, anything we do there, any building you do there, especially when you talk about raising raising the floor area, would be terrible. And also getting onto that road, much as it's not an issue, because I know it hasn't been read by Devon County Council, and much as I accept that when you're in a 40-ton lorry, very high up, it's easy to see the road. But when you're coming up onto the road, because it is, you drop down into that site, it's a dangerous thing. And as you say, that road, it's a fast road coming down there. And again, one van at the moment, no one living in it at the moment, someone could. But again, if you had a family in there with cars in there, lifetimes, you're going to have more. And to me, it's just, yeah, wrong place, wrong time. And there's very little upside other than tidying that very little area up, which I accept as a benefit, but not that good.
I've got to say, it hasn't been mentioned as an issue, but in terms of sustainable access to the village as well, that's along a much more dangerous road than Ven Ottery Road. You certainly wouldn't be walking or even cycling along that road.
But and I'm not going to argue against myself, however, you have only got to get over the bridge, and then there is a footpath that would then walk you into the centre of the village. So I think it is closer on that point, and I wouldn't argue against. I know it's outside the built-up area boundary, but I don't think you can argue about the sustainability of it, in my opinion, on that. And I know that's arguing against what I'm arguing, but.
Okay. Councillor, yeah.
Can just mention a little bit about the one that Councillor Brown has mentioned. As a bit of context.
Yeah, absolutely. And then we'll come to you, Peter. Mrs. Ormsby just wants to read a bit.
So just, I was just refreshing myself on the scheme that Councillor Brown has mentioned. And I think the difference between this and that site is that firstly, that wasn't in flood zone 3B, but more importantly, it was possible to have a safe, so it basically says how safe dry land, flood zone 1 can be accessed on foot from the northern boundary of the site adjacent to the building via the public footpath and into Elizabeth Close. So the key difference there is there was safe access and egress at times of flood, which isn't the case in this situation. So there is a difference there.
I think the local ward member at the time didn't agree with that. They said it did flood all round. That's a different matter, so.
Yeah, we won't re-argue that one again. Okay. Councillor Faithful, did you have a point?
No, I think what I was going to say has already just been said, so.
Okay, so we have a proposal to refuse. That's been seconded. So we'll take that to a vote. All those in favour of refusal? And those against? Any abstentions? Okay. So that is carried. And that brings our meeting to an end today then. So thank you very much for attending, and it just remains for me to wish you all a very Merry Christmas, and may the spirit of Christmas be with you. God bless us all.
Thank you.